and national parks and all the wilderness areas up and down the Sierras. And there's a fair amount of ancient forest left too in the Pacific coast, northwestern California, and in the Cascades and parts of the Central Coast. So that's where it is now. Now the Heritage Tree Act, which narrowly was defeated in the last legislature and probably be reintroduced, it would have protected the last individual trees that were on non-federal land that existed in 1850, the year of statehood. And the number of those that are left is well down under 1% of the forested land that's left in the state. So if we're looking to focus our energies on saving those forests that can still be saved, it's that 1% where we need to put our focus.
Well, with the Heritage Tree Preservation Act, it would save some of the last remaining old-growth trees in California, and there's very little of the old-growth trees here in California still, because most of them have been destroyed.
The Heritage Tree Preservation Act is statewide legislation that will prohibit the cutting of old-growth trees on non-federal forest land in California.
And I think it's not just an issue for people living in California, it's an issue for anyone throughout the world that enjoys the ancient redwood forest. Would you like to see the old trees saved?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is something that we definitely should do whatever it takes to reserve for next generation or generation to come. Otherwise, the tree keep coming down, and maybe 2-3 generations later, they don't see anything else left.
Would you like to bring your children to an old-growth forest?
If and when I have children, that would be one of the first places I'd bring them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can get a lot of knowledge from nature, and to see trees this big, it can put life in perspective. That these trees were here before a lot of things in history happened, and it gives you a real perspective. It puts your problems in a smaller light. You can see nature's grandeur and beauty helps. One of the ones that I often talk about is that old-growth trees are important in that they stabilize the soils. And if you look at areas of the state, even up in Oregon and Washington and certainly Northern California, where there's been a lot of logging, what you often see following that is landslides. And you see resulting degradation of waterways. And that leads to streams that are uninhabitable by fish. And it's helped bring about the real crisis we have all over the north coast of the United States, the northwest coast of the United States, with salmon habitat. And that's why so many species of salmon have become endangered and threatened. It goes back to the forest. I mean, I think when I first moved to this area from the Midwest, I didn't realize that when you cut a tree, you affect a salmon. And when you affect a salmon, you affect, if you want to get anthropomorphic about it, you affect the ability of a fisherman to feed his family. We've had an almost total collapse of the fishing industry on the North Coast over the past 30 or so years that I've lived here. And a good deal of that decimation of the fishing industry goes back to the cutting of the old-growth forests.
I heard that the fishing
The Healthy Forests Restoration Act, I almost hate to use that term because it's such a misnomer. President Bush's administration pushed that through in 2003 in the wake of one of the worst wildfire seasons we'd had. And the Bush administration used the public's fear of wildfire to justify this new so-called fuels reduction plan or program. And what it actually did is it went in and it took an existing national fire plan, which had been working well, and had been concentrating monies on in and near communities where wildfires could actually burn buildings and hurt communities. And it took that and restructured it so that the resources, the funds that were going into building fire breaks in tight around communities and buildings are now allocated to be spread out across up to 1.5 miles out from the edge of communities and buildings, well into the forest and well away from structures that could be burned. The reason for that, we think, is that the Bush administration wanted to reward its friends in the timber industry by letting them get their payment for doing brush removal and fuels reduction by taking more merchantable trees off to the sawmill. So they get large trees in payment for doing a certain amount of brush removal, again, deep into the forest, where not so much of that is needed. And when you take big trees out of the ecosystem, you increase wildfire danger. You dry out the forest, remove shade and moisture, and you leave behind a lot of flammable material from the logging operation. And all those things, it's well documented, increase fire frequency and severity. Logging does that, especially because it takes the biggest trees out of the forest. So the Bush plan did go through, it reallocated funds, it caused more big trees to be getting cut down, and generally that's
As I look at my little boy sleeping, he's 1 year old now, and I think about all the old growth trees that have been destroyed since I began this project, this film project, and, well, you know, it's just really sad that there's so little left.